A racist cop beat a pregnant black woman inside a courtroom, and just moments later, her husband, a high-ranking FBI agent, walked in and saw everything. It was supposed to be a day of justice. The woman had come to testify, bravely, about the night she was thrown to the ground, her belly pressed into cold concrete by a cop who never gave his name and never turned on his body cam. She was calm when she arrived at court, maybe even hopeful. What she didn't expect was to see that same officer, now dressed in full uniform, walking toward her with that same cold stare he wore the night he assaulted her. She froze, not out of fear, but out of disbelief. The system was supposed to protect her. But instead, it put her directly back into the hands of the man who had nearly cost her unborn child its life. She tried to speak up. She tried to tell the clerk, the bailiff, the judge. But her voice was dismissed. Her pain was minimized. And when the cop approached her, no one stopped him. He leaned in, close enough to smell the fear he believed was still there. "Should have kept your mouth shut," he hissed, his breath thick with hate. And then, without warning, he shoved her. Hard. She stumbled into a bench, her arms flailing as she tried to shield her belly. The room gasped, but no one moved. The judge looked down. The bailiff looked away. "Help me," she cried, her voice cracking as she clutched her side, trying to protect the life inside her. "Somebody please help me." But they didn't. Because they knew him. And they didn't want to lose their jobs. Then the courtroom doors slammed open. Silence. He stepped in, suited, serious, badge gleaming on his chest, a badge that outranked every man in that room. But at that moment, he wasn't just an agent. He was a husband. He was a father. And his wife was on the floor, bleeding. What happened next would send shockwaves through the justice system. Cameras went up. Phones started recording. And for the first time, the truth could no longer be ignored. Because what no one in that courtroom knew was that he wasn't there by chance. He had already been investigating the very officer who now stood frozen in place, his hands still clenched from the strike. For months, there had been whispers inside federal walls, of racism, cover-ups, even bribes to suppress body cam footage. But until now, there was no proof. No opening. No witness brave enough to stand alone. She was supposed to be that witness. And now, bleeding and humiliated, she had become the evidence itself. The FBI agent didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His authority filled the room like thunder before a storm. He knelt beside his wife, whispered something only she could hear, something soft, something that made her cry harder, and then he stood. The courtroom had turned into a furnace of tension, every eye watching, every camera capturing what had just happened. "You're done," he said to the cop. "And this time, the world's going to see what justice really looks like." The cop tried to speak. "It's not what it looks like," she was resisting, but the words were brittle, desperate. No one was listening anymore. The judge tried to interject, but the agent raised a folder, thick and heavy. "This is what it looks like," he said. And he dropped it on the floor. Files. Audio. Photos. A network of lies. A pattern of violence. Years of complaints that had disappeared. Witnesses who'd been silenced. And now, in front of a full courtroom, in front of a woman whose dignity had been shattered and whose strength still remained, the truth was about to explode. This wasn't just a case of police brutality. This was a federal takedown. And the man who thought he'd always get away with it, who laughed while watching his victims break, was about to learn what happens when the hunted becomes the hunter. But what none of them knew, not the judge, not the bailiff, not even the FBI agent himself, was that the woman on the floor, the one they thought was broken, was holding one final secret. One piece of truth that would flip the entire courtroom upside down before the verdict could even be spoken. A secret so deep that it would connect that officer, that courtroom, and that badge, in a way no one was ready for. But what was it? And how far was her husband willing to go to make sure justice wasn't just served, but exposed, loud, raw, and unforgettable? Stay until the end. Because this isn't just a story about racism or revenge. This is about what happens when the very system built to silence you has no choice but to hear you scream. And trust me, you'll want to hear what she said next. At Plow of Twist, we stand firmly against racism in all its forms. We recognize the pain, injustice, and strength that exist in your lived experiences, and we are committed to using storytelling to expose truth, inspire change, and uplift voices that matter. This channel does not tolerate hate, only healing, justice, and empowerment. Thank you for being here. We see you, we respect you, and we support you. Now, sit back and get ready for a powerful story. If you believe stories like this should be told, hit that subscribe button and join our movement. Enjoy the story. Baltimore wasn't the kind of city where people forgot pain easily. Its sidewalks were etched with stories, some shouted through protest, others whispered through tears. And within the tension that pulsed through its courthouses and precincts, a man named Marcus Cole had spent most of his adult life trying to keep order in a world that rarely gave it back. Tall, focused, with the kind of presence that turned heads even in silence, Marcus wasn't just an FBI agent. He was one of the Bureau's most respected internal affairs investigators, tasked with rooting out corruption, misconduct, and the abuse of power from within law enforcement itself. It was ironic, in a way, he had chosen to police the police, to challenge a system he had once believed in without question. But belief breaks when you live long enough to see how systems protect themselves and not the people they're meant to serve. Marcus hadn't always been this man. He'd grown up just a few blocks from where the courthouse now stood, raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs and a grandfather who taught him what dignity looked like, even when the world tried to strip it away. Discipline, honor, truth. Those weren't just words to Marcus, they were the rules he had promised himself to live by. And when he joined the FBI, he believed that change was possible from the inside out. He believed that if he was good enough, smart enough, careful enough, he could rise through the ranks and make real change. And in many ways, he had. His record was spotless. His instincts were razor-sharp. And yet, despite everything, he still found himself walking into rooms where he had to flash his badge twice, once to be recognized, and once to be respected. At home, things were different. There, he was just Marcus, the husband, the partner, the soon-to-be father. His wife, Ayanna, had a quiet strength that drew people in. She had been a social worker for years, serving the very same communities the justice system had long abandoned. And even when the job took its toll, even when she came home drained and exhausted from hearing stories that would haunt anyone else for years, she still carried herself with grace. Ayanna believed in people. She believed that if you listened hard enough, if you showed up consistently, change didn't have to be a myth. And when she and Marcus had found out they were expecting their first child, it felt like everything was finally aligning, like the fight they were both committed to was no longer just about survival. It was about legacy. But legacy is a fragile thing in a city like Baltimore, where power is often guarded by fear and truth is buried beneath layers of silence. Months before that fateful day in court, Ayanna had been driving home from work, tired, hungry, already thinking about what they might cook for dinner, when she noticed flashing lights in her rearview mirror. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't swerving. But she pulled over anyway, calm as always. What followed wasn't just an illegal stop, it was an assault. A violation. She never even got the officer's name, and he never bothered to offer one. What she got instead was a bruised shoulder, a scraped belly, and a chilling warning not to make noise about what happened. She went to the hospital, filed a report, and when Marcus arrived and saw her sitting in that sterile white room holding her stomach and biting her lip to stop from crying, something inside him shifted. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival. Marcus knew the system wouldn't protect Ayanna. Not on its own. So he did what he'd been trained to do, he launched an investigation. Quietly. Meticulously. And the deeper he dug, the more rot he uncovered. The officer, whose name he eventually found buried under redacted files and internal memos, had a history. Excessive force complaints. Racial profiling. Mysteriously missing bodycam footage. But each case had been buried, closed, swept aside. The man had friends in high places. People who signed papers without asking questions. People who made sure those questions were never asked again. Still, Marcus kept digging. Meanwhile, Ayanna had been called to testify in her own case. It had taken months just to get a hearing scheduled, and even longer to ensure that her case wasn't dismissed under insufficient evidence. She hadn't told Marcus everything, she wanted him to stay focused on the investigation. But he knew her too well. He could see the way she flinched when someone slammed a door too loudly, the way her hands cradled her belly a little tighter when they walked past a police car. She was strong, but she was tired. And she wanted closure. The courthouse wasn't unfamiliar to her. She'd sat in courtrooms for clients, for cases, for kids whose parents were taken from them too soon. But walking into that building for herself was different. It was heavier. As if the walls themselves were waiting to see whether she would be believed or dismissed like so many others. The courtroom was modest, fluorescent lighting, wooden benches, faded flags. But to her, it felt like a stage. She didn't want to perform. She wanted to be heard. What no one told her, what no one warned her, was that the officer who had assaulted her wouldn't just be present. He'd be front and center. No disciplinary action had been taken. No suspension. In fact, he had been reassigned to courtroom security. And when she walked in, her heart sank. There he was. Same eyes. Same smirk. Same silence. The judge didn't acknowledge it. The bailiff didn't flinch. To them, he was just another officer doing his job. But to Ayanna, he was a walking trauma. And when their eyes met, something electric passed between them. Not fear. Not anymore. Just fury. Pure, unfiltered, mother's fury. Still, she kept walking. Sat on the bench. Waited for her name to be called. Her heart was racing, but her face remained calm. She had promised herself she wouldn't break. Not in front of him. The room filled slowly, lawyers, clerks, a couple of observers. The officer moved closer. Too close. He whispered something, something vile, something meant to shake her, and she turned to face him, eyes locked. "Don't talk to me," she said, firm and clear. "You're not supposed to be near me." But there were no allies in that room. The judge called for order. The cop didn't step back. And then it happened. No warning. No hesitation. He struck her. The sound echoed. Papers dropped. A woman screamed. Ayanna collapsed, one arm bracing her fall, the other cradling her stomach. Her head hit the edge of the bench, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. The courtroom froze. Not one person moved. Until the door opened. Marcus walked in, late by less than 30 seconds. Just in time to see everything. What he did next wasn't instinct. It was justice. And it was only the beginning. Marcus didn't shout. He didn't raise a fist. His steps were steady as he walked toward Ayanna's body crumpled on the floor. His eyes scanned everything, the officer's clenched jaw, the silence of the judge, the crowd of people frozen in some cowardly ballet of disbelief and denial. He knelt beside her, brushed her hair back, whispered her name like a prayer. Her eyelids fluttered, her hand tightened around his wrist. She was conscious. She was in pain. But she was alive. And in that breathless moment, Marcus knew that whatever came next wouldn't be about restraint anymore. It would be about reckoning. He stood up and turned. The officer hadn't moved. His mouth curled into a false grin, one hand still hovering by his side. She tripped, he muttered with a lazy shrug, got herself worked up. Marcus didn't blink. You touched a pregnant woman in a federal courtroom, he said slowly, his voice low and precise. And you did it in front of witnesses. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain control of a courtroom he had long since abandoned. Agent Cole, please, this isn't the time or place for, Marcus cut him off without even looking his way. You're damn right it's not, he said. But this isn't your courtroom anymore. The bailiff stepped forward, unsure of where to stand. The defense attorney whispered something to the clerk, who then left the room with a shaky pace. One camera phone peeked over the back bench, then another. It was spreading. The moment was no longer theirs to contain. Marcus helped Ayanna to her feet. She winced, but stood tall. A long red welt ran along her cheekbone. Her eyes burned with something between fury and fatigue. Let me speak, she whispered to him, her voice raw. Not yet, he replied. First, we move you somewhere safe. But she pulled from his grasp. No, she said, louder now, straighter. He doesn't get to silence me twice. Across the room, the officer stiffened. She's a liar, he spat. A manipulative, Ayanna turned to him, her tone steely. You dragged me from my car. You slammed my stomach against your cruiser. You turned off your body cam and told me I didn't matter. But here I am. She faced the crowd, then the judge. I filed every report they told me to file. I gave every testimony. I waited months to be heard. And today, I walked into this courtroom, thinking I was finally safe, only to be attacked again. In front of all of you. She looked each face in the room dead in the eye. And not a single one of you moved. Silence hung heavy in the air, but not the kind that lulls. This one cracked. It fractured people's sense of safety, of complicity. A few heads turned away. Others stared, mouths tight. One woman quietly began to record. The officer shifted, finally realizing this wasn't going the way he thought. You're making a scene, he said, trying to laugh. You people always make scenes. Marcus walked toward him. In his hand now was a black folder. Nothing flashy. Just thick enough to be serious. You've spent a long time hiding behind silence, Marcus said, voice calm but sharp like a blade drawn slowly. But you picked the wrong victim. He laid the folder on the judge's bench. Inside this file is everything. Not just today's assault. Not just her case. But 10 others. 10. He looked at the judge, then the bailiff, then back to the officer. People you hurt. People whose names disappeared because you knew how to make the system work for you. Internal complaints. Edited footage. Convenient technical failures. The judge tried again. Agent Cole, if you have a case to make, you can do so through the appropriate channels, Marcus cut him off. The appropriate channels failed. Over and over again. So now. We do it here. We do it now. Ayanna stood next to him, her breathing steady now. She looked smaller somehow, physically, but emotionally she towered above every head in that courtroom. Why haven't you been suspended? Marcus asked, eyes still locked on the officer. Why are you guarding courtrooms instead of facing charges? Why has every complaint against you been marked unsubstantiated? You think I don't know how the system protects its own? You think I haven't watched my own colleagues look the other way when it's convenient? The officer's voice cracked. I don't know what you think you're doing, but I'm not answering to you. His hand instinctively reached toward his belt, toward the badge clipped to his hip, as if that shield could still protect him. But Marcus didn't flinch. You're right, Marcus said. You won't answer to me. He looked to Ayanna. You'll answer to her. The judge finally snapped. Enough. This court is out of order, and if either of you continue this public stunt, I will have no choice but to, but the words faltered. He watched the clerk rush back in, whisper something urgent to his ear. The judge's face blanched. Marcus saw it. So did Ayanna. What is it? She asked. The judge swallowed hard. There's been a release. A press leak. Something from the Department of Justice. Marcus allowed himself a half-smile. I sent it myself, 15 minutes ago. Ayanna looked at him, stunned. You did? He nodded slowly. Everything I found. Every file. Every name. Every redacted line. The public deserves to know. The courtroom stirred. Phones buzzed. The whispers turned to gasps as people began reading headlines off their screens. Federal investigation into local police officer, years of misconduct buried by Baltimore PD, whistleblower from inside FBI releases shocking evidence. The officer's face drained of color. You set me up. No, Marcus replied. You set yourself up. I just stopped covering for you. The bailiff stepped forward. Sir, I need to ask you to come with me. The officer tried to protest. I didn't do anything wrong. This is all political, it's personal, he's just doing this because she's a citizen, Marcus interrupted. A victim. And you're a criminal. The tension swelled. Everyone was watching now. This wasn't just about Ayanna anymore. It was about all the names in the folder. All the people who had waited, like she had, for the day someone powerful enough would finally say, enough. As the officer was led out, his curses echoed across the room. You people are destroying this country, he shouted. You're all the same. Marcus turned away. He didn't need to hear it. He had heard it all before. But what he hadn't heard, what even he wasn't prepared for, was what came next. Because just as the doors closed behind the officer, Ayanna touched Marcus's arm and said quietly, there's something you don't know. He looked at her, concern flickering in his eyes. What is it? She hesitated, her hand resting lightly on her stomach. What happened that night, she whispered, was worse than we thought. And just like that, the air changed again. Because the truth, her truth, was bigger than the case, bigger than the courtroom, bigger than even Marcus had imagined. And when she finally revealed it, everything they thought they knew would collapse. Marcus didn't move right away. He stood still in the middle of the courtroom, the words, there's something you don't know, echoing louder in his head than the officer's final curses as he was dragged out. Ayanna's voice had been calm, but there was something behind it, something buried deeper than fear or pain. It was a kind of resignation, a quiet weight she had been carrying alone for too long. He turned to her slowly, searching her face, realizing in real time that whatever she was about to say was not just an afterthought. It was the core of everything. The courtroom had begun to clear, a few murmurs still dancing in the air, but Marcus couldn't hear any of it. His world had narrowed to just her, her hand resting on her stomach, her eyes refusing to meet his. They walked out together. She leaned on him lightly, as if she was finally allowing herself to be held. Down the hallway, past cameras and questions, through a side door guarded now by 2 federal officers. A small room, quiet, off the record. Marcus closed the door and locked it. He turned to her. You said it was worse, he said, gently but firmly. What happened? She sat slowly, adjusting herself carefully in the chair, breathing through the pressure she still felt in her ribs. For a long moment, she just stared at her hands. Then, without looking up, she started speaking. That night, she said, when I got pulled over, it wasn't just him. Marcus stiffened, but said nothing. There was another car, she continued, her voice nearly flat now. Unmarked. Parked behind his. I didn't realize it at first. I thought it was just backup, maybe another patrol. But after he put me in cuffs and pushed me against the hood, someone got out of that second car. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Who? Ayana's jaw clenched. She finally looked up. Your supervisor. The words landed like stone. Marcus blinked. My supervisor, he repeated slowly, unsure he'd heard her right. You mean, who? Kavanaugh, she said. Silence. His world stopped. Ayana's voice cracked, but she kept speaking. He wasn't in uniform. But I saw his face. He stood behind the other officer, just watching. Not stopping it. Not saying anything. Just watching. Marcus stepped back, as if the very air in the room had turned poisonous. His mentor. His superior. The man who had recruited him into the Internal Investigations Unit, who had vouched for him, trained him, put him in rooms others never reached. Kavanaugh. The man who had taught him to believe that the system could be reformed from the inside. The same man who'd warned him, more than once, to let go of cases that didn't lead anywhere. Ayana stood up. I thought I was crazy, she said. I thought maybe the adrenaline messed with my memory. But the second I saw him on TV last week, standing next to the police chief, I knew I hadn't imagined it. And I didn't tell you because I wasn't ready. I didn't know what you would do. I didn't want you to burn your whole life down. Marcus was shaking his head, slow at first, then faster. That doesn't make sense, he whispered. Why would he be there? Why wouldn't he stop it? Why would, but he stopped. Because suddenly, it all did make sense. The delays. The red tape. The files that disappeared just before he could get to them. The way Kavanaugh always seemed to know which leads were worth following and which weren't. He wasn't guiding him. He was controlling him. Shielding someone. Shielding himself. Ayana stepped forward. He was protecting that cop, she said. And maybe others. Maybe even himself. Marcus looked at her, his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Did he touch you? He asked. She shook her head. No. But he saw it. All of it. And he let it happen. Marcus turned away, pacing now, his mind racing. The files he'd released, had they included anything on Kavanaugh? Had he missed something? Or had Kavanaugh just stayed clean, let others do the dirty work while he built walls around himself? It had been a setup. Not just that night. The whole investigation. Every move Marcus thought he was making on his own had been watched, calculated, manipulated. I need to bring him in, Marcus said finally, his voice lower than ever. I need to confront him directly. Ayana shook her head. If you do it now, he'll bury it. He'll make you look unstable. He has connections, Marcus. People will believe him before they believe us. Then what do you suggest? He asked, almost desperate now. I can't sit on this. I can't keep pretending like I don't know. He was there. He let it happen. She took his hand, firm now. Then we have to catch him the same way you caught the officer. With proof. With no way out. We expose him. Marcus looked at her, heart pounding, his mind suddenly rewiring itself around a new mission. This wasn't over. It had just widened. Kavanaugh wasn't just a bystander. He was a puppeteer. And Marcus had been his puppet. Later that night, Marcus stood outside the federal building downtown, watching the lights glow behind thick glass. He had been here 1,000 times, but now it looked different. Colder. The weight of betrayal settled into his bones. He entered through the back, no escort, no badge flash, just purpose. The walls greeted him with silence. Every hallway he passed, every nameplate on every door, held a new shade of suspicion. He reached Kavanaugh's office. The door was ajar. Voices inside. He paused. Listened. Kavanaugh was speaking on the phone. It got out faster than I thought, he was saying. He sent it directly to DOJ, bypassed the bureau's filters. Stupid move. A pause. No, I can handle it. He still trusts me. He's just angry. Emotional. I can pull him back in. Marcus felt his blood go cold. The voice on the other end responded, faint, but sharp. A woman's voice. If you can't, he goes under with the rest. You know that. Marcus pushed the door open. Kavanaugh looked up, startled, then quickly hung up the call. Marcus, he said, voice smooth as ever. You should have knocked. Marcus stepped in slowly, closing the door behind him. Why were you at the scene that night? Kavanaugh blinked. Excuse me. You heard me. Kavanaugh leaned back, folding his arms. Whatever your wife told you, she's mistaken. You know how trauma works. Faces get blurred. Details get. Marcus slammed a folder on the desk. Don't. Just don't. I've been piecing it together, and it all points to you. You knew about the officer. You protected him. You were there. For a brief second, the mask slipped. Kavanaugh's expression hardened. You don't understand how this works, he said. You think justice is about doing the right thing? No. It's about balance. And sometimes, keeping the public calm means letting certain people stay in place. He was controllable. You're a wild card. You let him assault my wife. I let a problem solve itself. Marcus stepped forward. I'm not going to bury this. I've already sent the files. Kavanaugh smirked. Then you better hope they don't start digging into yours. Marcus froze. Kavanaugh leaned in. You think you're clean, but no one is. You want to play hero? Fine. Just know that once this starts, there's no walking away. And you're not the only one they'll come for. Marcus didn't respond. Because he already knew. This was no longer about one cop. This was about the entire machine. And by morning, the whole world would know it too. Marcus stood in the center of the room, every muscle in his body tense, like a storm had taken root beneath his skin. His hands rested on the desk, palms flat against the cold wood, eyes locked on Kavanaugh with the kind of focus that didn't just threaten, it promised. The silence between them was thick, filled with the weight of shattered trust and something far more dangerous, clarity. There was no more doubt. The lines were drawn. He wasn't looking at a mentor anymore, he was staring into the face of the very corruption he had dedicated his life to fighting. Kavanaugh didn't flinch under the gaze. He leaned back slightly, the same smug composure that had once seemed like confidence now revealing itself as pure arrogance. He spoke again, slower this time, his voice laced with threat masked as reason. He told Marcus that no system survives without a little compromise, that the people above them, people who really ran things, were already deciding how this would end. You're smart enough to know, he said, that justice doesn't come from blowing everything up. It comes from knowing what to sacrifice. And who? Marcus didn't answer right away. He turned slightly, his eyes moving over the room. Every file, every plaque, every award mounted on the walls felt like a monument to a lie. He finally looked back and his voice came out low, steady, but burning from underneath. You were supposed to be better than this, he said. You looked me in the eye for years, told me we were cleaning the house. But you were just sweeping the dirt under different rugs. And you stood there while my wife screamed. While she begged. You did nothing. Kavanaugh shook his head. I protected the bigger picture, he said. I kept you in position so you could do real work. I gave you access, power. And you're gonna throw all of that away. For one woman. Marcus stepped forward, the pain now sharp in his chest, not from fear, but betrayal. That woman is my wife, he said. And she's the reason I even want this badge to mean something. Kavanaugh stood up now too, the air between them charged. You're emotional, he said. You're making decisions based on pain, and you're about to destroy your entire career over something you can't prove. Marcus raised his chin slightly. That's where you're wrong, he said. Because you made one mistake. You assumed she was alone that night. Kavanaugh's face twitched. Marcus reached into his coat and pulled out a flash drive. He placed it gently on the desk between them. A nearby business had a security camera on the street, he said. It caught your car. It caught your face. And it caught the timestamp, same as the police stop. That footage has already been uploaded to an encrypted server and forwarded to multiple outlets. It's over, Kavanaugh. For the first time, the mask cracked. A flicker of panic passed behind Kavanaugh's eyes. He reached for the drive, but Marcus moved first. That's not the only copy, he said. You taught me too well. Kavanaugh sank back into his chair, the color draining from his face. You've just made an enemy of the Bureau, he muttered. Do you understand that? You've gone too far. Marcus took a deep breath. No, he replied. You did. And I'm just the one who finally said it out loud. He turned toward the door. Kavanaugh's voice followed him. You think the public will care? They'll forget. They always do. They'll be outraged for a few days, maybe a week. And then it'll fade. Marcus paused at the door, looking back one last time. Maybe, he said. But this time, they're not just hearing it. They're seeing it. By the time Marcus stepped out into the corridor, his phone had already begun buzzing. The footage had reached the media. Headlines were spinning. The DOJ had issued a formal statement. Social media was on fire. For the first time in years, the system was being forced to stop and look itself in the mirror. And it was ugly. He made his way to the hospital. Ayanna had been taken there for observation after the incident in the courtroom. She was resting now, eyes closed, but not asleep. When Marcus entered the room, she opened them, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. No words. Just breath. He sat beside her, took her hand in his, and whispered, "It's done." She didn't respond at first. Her lips trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the release of holding so much inside. Finally, she said, "Are we safe now?" He hesitated. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "But we're not silent anymore." She nodded slowly. "Then that's enough." Later that evening, a press conference was held. Not by Marcus, but by the acting deputy director of the FBI. Kavanaugh had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. The officer who assaulted Ayanna had been officially charged and taken into federal custody. But more than the names or the punishments, what struck people was the evidence. The footage. The timeline. The compiled testimony that Marcus had spent weeks gathering. It was undeniable. And it was public. Inside the hospital room, Ayanna watched the news unfold in silence, Marcus by her side. She turned to him at one point and said, "You know what scares me?" He looked at her. "What?" She paused, swallowing hard. "That we needed all this, video, files, national outrage, just to be believed. Just to get them to listen." Marcus nodded. "I know. But now they're listening." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then let's make sure they don't stop." A nurse entered a few minutes later, cheerful and gentle. "Good news," she said. "Your baby is just fine. Strong heartbeat. No complications." Ayanna smiled for the first time in days. Marcus kissed her forehead. And in that moment, the world outside could wait. But deep down, both of them knew it wasn't truly over. Because systems don't fall in one strike. They crumble piece by piece, truth by truth. And Marcus wasn't done telling the truth. Not yet. The hours that followed the press conference unfolded like a slow collapse. A sense of victory hung heavy in the air, but it was a quiet, guarded kind of victory, one measured not in celebration, but in the fragile balance between truth and retaliation. Marcus sat in the hospital hallway outside Ayana's room, watching federal agents stream in and out of offices across the building on the news feed playing from his phone. He didn't feel relief yet. Not truly. The storm had passed through the courtroom and ripped through the upper floors of the bureau, but the wind hadn't settled. There was too much left exposed. Too many people who had looked the other way. Too many who had played small roles in a much larger, more dangerous performance. And now that the curtain had finally been pulled back, the question loomed large in Marcus's mind: what happens when justice collides with loyalty? He had spent most of his career believing that truth was the highest calling, that integrity could coexist within the walls of law enforcement if the right people fought for it. But now he was being forced to face a more uncomfortable truth: what if the system had never been broken, but had instead been designed exactly this way? What if the very structure he'd sworn to serve had always relied on silence, fear, and sacrifice as pillars for its foundation? Marcus wasn't just challenging corruption anymore. He was challenging identity, purpose, legacy. And the closer he came to exposing the last layers of that machine, the more he realized that doing the right thing might cost him everything. The director of the FBI had called him that morning. The tone was measured, official, with carefully chosen words. "This is bigger than you now," she had said. "We're under scrutiny from every direction. We need cooperation, not chaos." He understood the coded language. They wanted him to stop. To step back. Let the internal committees take over. Let politics soften the edges of the story. But Marcus couldn't. Not when he knew what still hadn't been said. Not when there were names still hidden inside folders, names of victims and officers and supervisors who had all played a role in the decades-long illusion of accountability. Later that day, a senior agent from Internal Affairs approached him in the hospital cafeteria. She sat across from him without asking. Her eyes were tired, but sharp. "They'll offer you a deal," she said. "They'll tell you to sign off on a redacted report. They'll protect your record. Maybe even promote you, spin you into the face of reform." Marcus didn't respond, just stared at the table. She leaned in. "But if you keep pushing? If you name names that haven't been named yet? They'll make you the problem. The rogue agent. The emotional husband. They'll twist your integrity into instability. You know how this goes." Marcus finally looked at her. "I'm not afraid of them," he said. She smiled, but it wasn't warm. "You should be," she replied. "Because they're not afraid to lose you." Back in Ayana's room, she was sitting upright now, stronger. Her eyes followed Marcus as he walked in, immediately sensing the shift in him. "What did they say?" she asked. Marcus sat beside her and exhaled. "They want me to walk away. Say I did my part. Let them handle the rest." She studied his face. "And are you going to?" He shook his head slowly. "I can't. There's more. People still hiding behind paper trails, pushing policies that keep voices silenced. If I stop now, it means they win by cutting the infection without treating the disease." Ayana reached out and took his hand. "Then don't stop. But don't lose yourself in this, either. We still need you." That night, Marcus returned home alone to retrieve some files. The house felt different now. Quieter, heavier. He moved through the living room to his study, opening the locked drawer where he kept his most sensitive documents. He pulled out a manila envelope marked, "Confidential," in his handwriting. Inside were names, officers, investigators, legal advisors, connected not only to Ayana's case, but to a chain of abuse and cover-up stretching back nearly a decade. Among them was a name he hadn't wanted to believe could be there: Agent Peterson. A colleague. A friend. The man who had sat across from him at countless briefings, who had held his child's first ultrasound picture with awe and told him he was going to be an amazing father. Now that name was on a report linked to falsified statements and missing evidence from 3 separate cases. Marcus sat down, the envelope resting on his lap, the air in the room growing still. How much betrayal could a person absorb before becoming something else entirely? There was no glory in this, no satisfaction. Just a slow unraveling of everything he had trusted. The next morning, he requested a meeting with the director in person. Not to threaten. Not to plead. But to confront the weight of everything still buried. The director listened quietly, her hands folded, her expression unreadable. When Marcus finished laying out the remaining evidence, she remained silent for a moment, then spoke. "You've done your job, Agent Cole. And more. But we're not ready for all of this to come out at once." "Not yet." Marcus stood. "That's not your decision anymore." She didn't stop him. And that was the moment he realized they were waiting for him to walk into the fire first, because someone always had to be the one who couldn't be bought. Someone always had to take the fall so the rest could pretend progress had been made. Back in the hospital, Ayanna was preparing for discharge. Her body still ached, but her mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. She watched Marcus as he entered the room, his face carved by exhaustion but eyes still lit with determination. "What now?" she asked him. He sat beside her, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a new envelope. "Now," he said, "we release everything. All of it. Names, documents, audio files. No more back doors. No more waiting for permission. If we go down, we go down standing." She nodded. Together. The next morning, Marcus uploaded the full case archive to an independent news network, known for fearless reporting and zero corporate ties. Within minutes, the story began to erupt. This wasn't just about one officer anymore. This was about a culture. A structure. And a man who dared to name it out loud. But with that choice came consequences. By noon, Marcus was officially suspended from the bureau pending a full inquiry. Media vans began appearing outside their house. Reporters circled the hospital. Supporters rallied. Protesters marched. And through it all, Marcus and Ayanna stood firm. The dilemma was no longer about guilt or innocence. It was about how far someone would go to protect their values in a world that punished the honest and rewarded the complicit. The public began to ask harder questions. Not just about the officer or Kavanaugh, but about how many others had quietly enabled them. About what accountability really meant. About whether real change was even possible without total upheaval. As the days passed, messages poured in from across the country, some filled with hope, others with threats. Marcus knew the machine would fight back harder now. It always did when it felt cornered. But for the first time in a long time, he felt clear. Not safe. Not triumphant. But clear. He hadn't just exposed a system. He'd forced it to look in the mirror. And the reflection was just beginning to scream. The nights were the hardest. When the city slowed and the noise faded, when Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling with Ayanna asleep beside him, her hand resting on her belly like a silent vow, his thoughts would spiral. Not from doubt, but from the crushing weight of what came next. Every move he had made was irreversible now. The second he released the documents, he had crossed a line there was no return from. His badge didn't carry protection anymore. His former allies had gone quiet. The ones who called to offer support all carried the same coded message: you did what you had to do, now stop before you become the target. But Marcus already knew he was the target. That wasn't a threat. That was the price. He watched Ayanna sleep sometimes, just breathing. Not because he doubted her strength, but because her presence was the only thing that made the chaos outside feel distant. There was something grounding in her resilience. Even after everything she'd endured, she had chosen to stand beside him as the storm rolled in. She never asked him to stop. Never asked him to consider the risk to their careers, their safety, their unborn child. She simply reminded him, again and again, why the fight mattered in the first place. She had given him purpose long before the Bureau did. Now she gave him the courage to keep going without it. One morning, the call came. A live debate had been scheduled on national television. The network wanted Marcus to appear alongside a senior representative from the Bureau, someone who would argue that what he had done, though understandable, was dangerous, reckless, and detrimental to public trust. Marcus stood in front of the bathroom mirror, tie in hand, staring at his own reflection. "You don't owe them anything," Ayanna said from behind him. "You already told the truth." He looked at her through the mirror. "If I don't go, they control the narrative. If I do, they'll come at me with everything they have." She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around him from behind. "Then don't go to win. Go to remind people that we exist. That we bleed. That we remember." The studio lights were blinding, the air sterile and artificial. Marcus sat across from a well-groomed bureau official who wore the perfect mask of concern without conviction. The anchor introduced the segment with rehearsed solemnity, then turned to Marcus. "Agent Cole, former Agent Cole, I should say, many are calling you a whistleblower, a hero. Others argue you betrayed your oath, compromised national security, and put agents at risk. What do you say to that?" Marcus sat quietly for a moment, then answered, his voice steady. "I didn't betray my oath. I honored it. The oath isn't to silence. It's to truth. And if telling the truth makes me a threat to the Bureau, then the Bureau has forgotten who it serves." The debate unfolded with tension measured by every breath. The representative spoke of process, of protocol, of internal mechanisms of accountability. Marcus spoke of the names, of the lives shattered, the children left fatherless, the bodies buried under paperwork and excuses. At one point, the representative raised his voice slightly. "You're asking the public to believe that the system is intentionally designed to fail people of color, that we are knowingly complicit in abuse." Marcus looked directly into the camera and said, "No. I'm not asking them to believe anything. I'm showing them what we've hidden. What we've normalized. And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. Because the people we've hurt have been uncomfortable their whole lives." Back at home, Ayanna watched every second. When he returned later that night, she didn't say anything right away. She simply took his hand and guided him to the couch. They sat in silence, the soft hum of the television playing muted headlines in the background. Then she said, "You didn't sound like an agent tonight. You sounded like a man who finally got his voice back." He rested his head against hers. "I think I've spent my whole career learning how to speak their language. And now I just want to speak ours." The next morning brought more news. Protests had spread to multiple cities. Young people had printed Marcus's quotes on posters. A mural appeared overnight in West Baltimore, painted across a brick wall with Marcus's silhouette beside a pregnant woman in profile. Underneath, 3 words, "Truth is louder." But it wasn't just support pouring in. Anonymous messages, threats, subtle warnings began arriving too. Ayanna's car tires were slashed one evening while parked at the hospital. A letter with no return address was slipped into their mailbox, 5 words, typed in all caps, "You've gone too far, Cole." Marcus filed a report, but he knew better than to expect follow-up. The machine wasn't going to protect him now. But the thing that shook him most wasn't the threats, it was a phone call. Late one night, a number he didn't recognize lit up his screen. Against his better judgment, he answered. A man's voice, low and nervous, came through the line. "I was there. I saw what they did to your wife. I was in the precinct that night. I kept my mouth shut because I thought it would protect my pension. But it's been eating at me. You were right. You were always right. And if you need someone to testify, I will." Marcus didn't even speak. His throat closed. The man gave a name, a badge number, then hung up. Marcus sat in the dark, phone still to his ear long after the line had gone dead. It wasn't just the confirmation of the truth, it was the beginning of something deeper. The cracks were spreading inside the system. People were talking. And not just to him. They were talking to each other. A week later, Ayanna went into early labor. The stress, the trauma, the endless pressure had worn her body thin. Marcus rushed her to the hospital, heart hammering with every red light, every second he couldn't hold her hand. In the delivery room, time collapsed. Hours stretched. Then, finally, their child arrived. A girl. Small but strong, lungs full of life. They named her Nia. It meant purpose. She was born into a world still aching with injustice, but now she had parents who had reshaped a piece of it with their own hands. As Marcus held Nia for the first time, he felt the chaos outside recede. He thought of all the pain that had led them here, of the blood and silence and fire it had taken just to get a moment like this. And in that moment, he understood something he hadn't before: not all victories are loud. Some are quiet. Breathing. Warm. Real. And those are the ones worth everything. But even as he stood in the hospital window watching the sun rise over Baltimore, he knew it wasn't over. There would be hearings. Trials. More attempts to discredit him. But now, they had faces. Now, they had names. Now, the stories had voices louder than redacted reports and polished press statements. And soon, those voices would rise together. Because justice had finally found its heartbeat. The hospital room had changed. What once was a place of recovery and reflection had now transformed into something sacred, a space where the past and future met in the fragile heartbeat of a newborn. Marcus sat beside Ayanna, his daughter nestled in his arms, her skin warm, soft, impossibly small. Her eyes fluttered open for just a second, dark and searching, like she was trying to understand the world she had just entered. He leaned down, whispered her name against her forehead, Nia, and promised her something no court or institution could ever guarantee, that he would protect her truth, even if it meant destroying everything else. Ayanna watched him closely, the silence between them filled with more emotion than words could ever carry. She knew Marcus had changed. Not into someone else, but into someone fully himself for the first time. He wasn't just a husband or an agent now. He was a father. And that changed everything. That evening, a storm rolled through Baltimore, thunder cracking like gunshots across the sky. The power flickered once, then steadied. Ayanna slept peacefully, Nia curled beside her, swaddled in soft cotton. Marcus stood by the window, phone in hand, watching the city lights blur through the rain. A notification appeared. Another email from the DOJ, this time requesting a closed-door testimony. They wanted to meet in Washington. They wanted him to bring everything, evidence, statements, even the recordings he hadn't yet released. He stared at the message, reading it over and over, feeling the pressure tighten around his chest. It wasn't fear. It was anticipation. The kind that came before a second wave. This wasn't a resolution. This was the system pulling itself back together, trying to manage the damage, trying to rewrite the script with him as a character they could still control. He returned to his seat by Ayanna's bed, watching her chest rise and fall with slow, steady breaths. Then he whispered, "They want to talk." Her eyes opened slowly. "And do you think they'll listen?" He hesitated. "They'll listen," he said, "but not because they care. Because they have no choice now." She reached out for his hand. "Then make sure you don't just tell them what they already know. Make them feel it." The next morning, Marcus stood outside the DOJ building in D.C., his suit damp from the misting rain, files clutched under one arm, a copy of the original flash drive sealed in a protective envelope. He had been escorted through side entrances, kept away from cameras, ushered into a sterile room where 5 officials sat behind a long table, faces blank, eyes cautious. One of them offered a seat. Another handed him water. No one smiled. He remained standing. You already have the documents, he said. So let me be clear. I didn't come here to cooperate. I came here to finish what I started. One of the officials, a woman with silver streaks in her tightly pulled hair, leaned forward. Agent Cole, we recognize your service. We're not here to punish you. We're here to understand how things escalated to this point. He met her eyes without flinching. They didn't escalate. They were exposed. There's a difference. Another man, younger, clearly uncomfortable, flipped through the files as if trying to find a loophole in a truth too solid to dismiss. Some of these statements are deeply concerning, he said. But protocol exists for a reason. Releasing information the way you did, Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp now. Protocol protected the people who assaulted my wife. It buried the footage. It shielded Kavanaugh. So don't talk to me about protocol like it's sacred. It's selective. They tried to contain the meeting. To redirect it toward policy, toward process, toward phrases like, internal review, and, reform initiatives. But Marcus didn't let them. He told them about the calls that came after the leak, about the voices of officers ready to speak, but still terrified. About victims too broken to testify but begging for someone to believe them. He told them about the mural in West Baltimore, not because he cared about being painted, but because it wasn't about him. It was about the fact that people were finally seeing themselves reflected in something that looked like power. He told them about Ayanna. About the night she didn't scream. About the way she sat through her own testimony knowing her attacker stood 10 feet away and no one intervened. And then he told them about Nia. My daughter was born into a system that could have erased her before her first breath, he said. And I won't spend her life teaching her how to survive it. I'll spend it changing it. The room fell silent. One of the men finally said, "What exactly is it that you want?" Marcus took a step forward. Transparency. Real reform. Independent oversight. An acknowledgement. Not to me, but to every name in those files that's never been said out loud. The woman nodded once, slowly. You'll get a response, she said. He turned and left without another word. He didn't need a response. He needed change. Back home, Ayanna sat on the porch, Nia asleep in her arms, wrapped in a blanket patterned with tiny stars. Marcus sat beside her, both of them watching the sky shift from gray to gold. How did it go? She asked. He exhaled. They listened. I don't know if they heard. She looked at him, her gaze steady. Then we keep talking. Until they can't ignore us. In the following days, support surged and so did resistance. Marcus was invited to speak at universities, churches, community centers. Everywhere he went, people asked the same question in different ways, is there hope? And Marcus always gave the same answer, hope isn't passive. It's what you build when nothing is handed to you. He met mothers who had lost sons, fathers who hadn't hugged their kids in years because of false convictions, teenagers who thought truth was something that only lived on screens. And with each story, each hand held, each tear wiped away, Marcus understood that the battle wasn't his alone. It was generational. Cultural. Spiritual. But in the midst of the firestorm, a quiet complication emerged. A reporter he trusted called him one night, voice tight with unease. There's a file we missed, she said. It was hidden deeper than the others. I only found it because of a cross-reference. Marcus tensed. What is it? She paused. It's about you. For a moment, the air drained from his lungs. Go on, he said. She read slowly, carefully. There's a sealed memo, dated 2 years ago, alleging you obstructed an investigation, one involving a use of force incident. Marcus's voice dropped. That's not true. I know, she said. The timing is suspicious. But it's been unsealed. It's going to surface. He hung up and sat in the dark, heart pounding. They were going to paint him with the same brush he'd fought so hard to clean. They were going to weaponize his record against him. Ayanna found him there, silent, eyes locked on nothing. "What is it?" she asked. He told her. Every word. Her jaw clenched. "So what do we do?" He looked at her. "We stay ahead of it. We name it first. We don't run." The next day, Marcus released a video, raw, unscripted. He sat in front of a single camera and addressed the claim. "There is a file that says I interfered with an investigation," he said. "That file was buried until I started naming the ones who really did. I have nothing to hide. I've made mistakes. But I have never protected a system that harms people like me and calls it law. If you want to believe the worst about me, that's your right. But I'd rather be remembered as the man who stood in the fire than the one who stood behind the badge and watched the world burn." The video went viral. And something changed. Because truth, once spoken without fear, becomes contagious. And Marcus had just set it free. The day Marcus was called to testify before the Congressional Subcommittee on Federal Law Enforcement Reform, the city held its breath. Outside the Capitol, thousands had gathered, some holding signs bearing his name, others wearing shirts printed with the mural of his silhouette and the word "Truth." He walked into the building not as an agent, not even as a whistleblower, but as a man who had risked everything for something greater than himself. Inside the hearing room, cameras blinked, politicians adjusted their jackets, and the tension sat thick over the long table where Marcus would soon speak. When his name was called, he rose with quiet confidence and walked to the microphone. He didn't bring a prepared statement. No script. No paper. Just presence. He began with the simplest of truths, that systems aren't changed by exposure alone, but by accountability. He told the committee that transparency was not just a buzzword but a responsibility, that protection without justice was a lie dressed in uniform. He shared stories not from files but from families, victims whose names had never made headlines, whose grief had been marked confidential. He spoke of policy and data, but also of humanity. He reminded them that every statistic had a pulse. That silence was not neutrality, it was betrayal. And when asked what he hoped the country would learn from his journey, Marcus paused and said, that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's telling the truth when everything is built to make you quiet. The hearing made national headlines. Policies that had sat dormant for years were suddenly revived. Community oversight boards gained momentum. Several high-ranking officials, including Kavanaugh, were officially indicted, their trials set to begin under federal scrutiny. Ayanna, now fully recovered, returned to advocacy work, this time from a national platform. She began building programs to support women of color who had survived police violence, providing legal support, mental health counseling, and above all, visibility. Her voice, once dismissed in a courtroom, now filled auditoriums. People listened. They believed her. Because she had shown them what strength looked like in its rawest, most uncompromising form. As for the officer who attacked her, he was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, not only for the assault but for a pattern of abuse long hidden by the department. During his trial, footage from multiple incidents was played aloud, including the final video showing him striking Ayanna. He showed no remorse. But the system he had used to shield himself finally turned against him when faced with undeniable evidence and public pressure that refused to be ignored. Marcus was offered a reinstatement by the FBI. Not as an agent, but as the head of a newly formed Office for Ethical Integrity within the Department of Justice, tasked with independently investigating abuse within federal agencies. He accepted, not because he wanted power, but because he wanted to be in the room where decisions could no longer be made in darkness. But he set a condition: full autonomy. No red tape. No filtered reports. And a public liaison board, led by civilians, including survivors. When they agreed, he knew it was real. He took the office, not to return to the old system, but to rebuild it from the inside, brick by brick, voice by voice. Back home, Nia grew fast. Her first steps came in the middle of a press call Marcus was giving from his living room. She wobbled into view, and the reporter paused mid-question, watching her with a grin. Marcus smiled too, lifting his daughter into his arms and saying, "That's what we fight for." Later that night, he told Ayanna, "She won't have to know silence like we did." Ayanna rested her head on his shoulder. "No. But she'll know what it means to break it." Years passed. Books were written. Documentaries made. But Marcus never became a symbol to himself. He remained a father, a husband, a man who simply refused to back down when the line between duty and justice blurred too far. In interviews, when asked if he ever regretted releasing the files, he would answer, "Only that it took me so long to do it." Because in the end, the truth didn't destroy him. It set him free. And now, to you, who've watched, listened, followed this story to its end, let me ask you something that matters more than headlines or heroes. What does it take for someone to risk everything for what's right? How many times must someone be silenced before their voice becomes too powerful to ignore? This story isn't just about Marcus or Ayanna or the uniformed man who believed he was untouchable. It's about the moment when someone stands up and says, "Enough." It's about what you do when that moment comes to your doorstep. Will you look away? Or will you speak? Because the truth, your truth, matters. And stories like this one are just the beginning. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel, then join us. Subscribe to Tales of Twist for more powerful, human, and unforgettable stories that reveal what lies beneath the surface. Don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. Tell us, what would you do when the system turns its back? We'll be reading. And we'll be listening.